Hey, Tony, so good to have you here.
Hey Ken, thanks for having me on, man. Looking forward to getting to know you and maybe hurting some feelings or giving some value. People get to decide.
I don't know. It depends on who you're talking to, I guess.
Right.
I had you on really because heard a lot about your book, read your book, listened to your podcast. And I would say you're the perfect guy to really be. Our audience is like a mix of both entrepreneurs and corporate types,
Mhm.
but leaders of all types, really. And your journey really started, it sounded like in corporate, right? And then you created a side hustle. And without me telling too much of that story, do you mind kind of recapping for us how you became the side hustle millionaire?
Yeah, I guess the early phases of me, I'm a car guy. I'm a fanatic. I love to build and race cars. And so that was initially the reason I went to pursue engineering. Got a mechanical engineering degree. I was working full time as a contractor, as a welder, a pipe fitter, waiting tables, things like that. It took me 7 years to go through school. And when I finally got out of school, I interviewed with some of the big three automotive suppliers and things like that. And I didn't want to move to Michigan and Detroit area because just I'm from Houston. I liked it better here. I like the climate here, just more things to do. And literally the oil companies here in the United in Houston, because it's like the oil capital of the world, really paid a lot more than the automotive industry. So I said, man, I could actually afford the cars that I would go design instead of, having to just be a designer. So I ended up staying here in the oil and gas. But, with anything with our careers, it doesn't really scratch the itch if it's not your passion. You can be really good at it. You can be very highly compensated at something. But if you don't love it all the time, then you start looking for external ways to kind of go do that kind of thing. And for me, I said, hey, I want to build a website for people that race General Motors performance cars. So your Chevrolet, Cadillac, Pontiac back then, where can we hang out, talk about cars, make them faster, become better drivers, make them look cooler, get access to some maybe discounts on parts. And so I created that community. That was ls1tech.com. And that was in 2001. So I was learning how to build websites at the time, learning how to do Photoshop, graphic design, kind of figure out how to be creative on the internet. And it just kind of grew and grew and grew because we were always creating value and showing people how to do all these things. So the value proposition was really high. It was free for the users. And we quickly realized, like, if we just attract more eyeballs, more attention, it'll attract the advertisers. And that's how we'll monetize it on the back end, just like social media platforms today. And, so we had over
Oops,
100,000 users per day visiting that website.
in the early 2000s.
Yeah.
And when you went into it, because it sounds like it spawned from frustration from not being able to be engaged in your passion, right? So it started as more, did it start with monetizing it in mind, or did it start with, I need an outlet, I need a creative outlet, I need a community, and then from there, did it grow?
It was not even out of frustration. It was just, I just knew that most people get off at work at 4:30, 5 o'clock, and they kind of go sit on the couch, watch TV, and they kind of kill the rest of the evening. And I've never been that way. I've always been the one that just assesses my life. I looked at where I am and I go, hey, am I where I want to be? Do I have the things I want to have? Have I achieved the things I would like to achieve? And if the answer is no, then I always been the one that just go do extra work. I mean, in the past, I
Right.
was like picking up overtime, picking up a second or third job sometimes. And I know that that's not the way to think now, but that's all I knew because I had very strong working class parents. My mom was a cafeteria worker in public schools. My dad was a Vietnam vet, U.S. Marine, and he worked in refineries after that, blue collar, both of them. And so I understood trading my units of time for units of dollar back then is the only way to do things. And so to me, getting home at 5 o'clock in the afternoon after a white collar engineering job, I was like, man, I got a good 5, 6 hours that I could do something to create some kind of income or get a little further ahead, and also curious, just learning new things, right? And so it was never intended to go make millions of dollars. It was just something that I was looking for, that creative outlet. And I also treated it very seriously because I think a lot of times people create these businesses, these side hustles, and they kind of half-ass things and they get half-ass results. And then they wonder why they're not making any money. It's because if you half-ass it, you should only expect half-ass results. And if you call it your hobby business, you're only going to get hobby results. So
Totally.
whenever you're doing something in market, nobody cares if you're a beginner or a novice and those kind of things at it. So if you start regarding your side business as a professional business from day one, keep it on the books, make sure you have a professional looking website, get your branding in check, all these things check the box, you'll actually create the perception that it's a more robust, more developed company. And that's going to attract more potential customers because if they look at you and you look like you're an amateur, they're not going to cut you any slack. They're going to go look for someone that looks like a professional. So little
Totally.
things and branding and little details do matter in business.
So when you started this, because I like what you're saying right here, because I feel like when people start side hustles, even the word a little bit is by nature side hustle. It's not my full time gig, right? It's on
Yeah.
the side. It's not as serious. It's a thing I do. If it makes it, it makes it. If it doesn't, it doesn't. It sounds like when you went after this business plan, financial projections, probably. Did you structure it as if it was going to go somewhere from day one?
No, I had no idea the scale that it could get to. I mean, really,
Right.
the way I was thinking small is back then I had a Pontiac Trans Am. It was brand new. It was kind of my graduation gift to myself, right? Car payment back then was $500 a month. I said, man, if I build this website and I learn how to do websites and I learn how to manage servers and I learn graphic design, I learn a little bit about marketing and I can make $500 a month, that'd be cool. Like have a free car doing something I love. So it was really thinking very small because I thought that my career, because I'd only been a few years into engineering at that point, it's like, okay, six figures. I mean, someday I'm going to make 200,000 plus and it'll be in, you kind of just have that in the pipeline and you kind of think it's
Yep.
going to happen eventually. And it did. But I really didn't think about making, at the peak when we sold that company in 2007 to a private equity company, we were profiting about 400,000 a year. So
That's
my
amazing.
little side business that took very little of my time was actually making a lot more than my salary at the time. So when I think about this now, like your side business or your full-time career, doesn't mean that the more time you put in means that's going to be more valuable or has more pay, right? It's sometimes the little side dish on your plate becomes the main course. And you shouldn't think that you need to dump more hours into it. Again, it's kind of that wrong mentality, that wrongful, around money. Like I got to go put more hours in. And I built processes and systems and people in place because I had a very demanding career. I was working offshore. Sometimes I'd be gone for 28 days. Sometimes I was in Africa or England or France or Italy or so I never could guarantee I was going to be on the internet and I couldn't definitely have a storefront or somewhere I had to show up every day and check in. So I had to build these businesses in a way that other people could manage those things and I could just check in whenever I could.
Amazing. So you had to, in the early days of the internet, basically, or at least early days of popularity of the internet, establish a website, establish a remote, truly remote business. It seems like everybody's remote now, but like not 20 plus years ago. And then it scales to where you're making a few $100,000 a year. Why did it take so long for you to leave the corporate job?
I'm still equally driven in my career. I mean, I
Yeah.
felt that, that's what we call a sunk cost fallacy. I mean, I understand that now, but when you invest a lot of time and a lot of money into something, getting your education, for example, and working 20 plus years in your career, that's a lot of investment. Okay.
Yeah.
Most people are unwilling to leave that investment because they think that, I've done all this money and time and blood, sweat, and tears. Like, who am I to walk away from this? Like, what kind of crazy person would do that? And the reality is that all of that investment is a sunk cost. Like you're not getting that back. It's
Right.
already done. It's already executed. It's not going to change your future. It's just the way it is. And so whether you leave or not should not depend on what you've already done because it's a sunk cost. You're not going to get a
Right.
refund.
It's over.
And so it's a sunk cost fallacy is what we call it. It's false type belief system. And I think I got most of that from my mom, to be honest. I mean, Japanese immigrant, she was always very strict on education. And even after I sold company for millions of dollars, there was a period of probably 4 or 5 years that she would still ask me, "Are you still looking for another job? Are you going to use that engineering degree?" And like
Yeah.
things like that. So think about these are belief systems that our parents adopt because to them being unemployed or things like that is like the biggest scary thing in the world. Because I get it, my dad was a contractor, he'd get laid off. We saw that was bad times, and so I understood where it came from, and I adopted that early in my adult life. And now I'm pretty aware, like that's not the way to go with things like that. And I didn't talk to my mom about money and how much I earned and things like that. So, she had no context. So it's just if you have these belief systems, just really question yourself like, why do I believe that? Where did it come from?
Right.
And does this belief system serve me for where I want to be?
Right. And I think, I mean, for a lot of us too, it's the if I go to school to whatever, be a doctor, and I'm 8 years into my education and another 4 years into doing something, but then I find that it's not serving me. I find a business or another interest that's much better. But to admit that or follow that direction, even if it's the best direction, in a way to us says, well, the last 12 years were a waste of time, right? Or I made the wrong choice. And it's like, no, you didn't. You just lived your life for 12 years and you know, you're switching lanes now for the better because this no longer fills your cup in the way that it needs to. Or maybe it does, but you need something else on the side to make you whole or whatever it is. So, yeah. So was it, so did you have your corporate job right up until the moment you sold to private equity?
No, I actually stayed in the corporate game until 2015. And it's
Okay.
because I was pursuing an executive path. I was working for the top 10 operators, oil and gas. My final salary job was with Chevron. And, so I was making 240,000 a year and I was getting a lot of extra overtime and things working international projects. Very lucrative, good pension plans, things like
Yeah.
that, right? And so I already had a very good lifestyle for many years running these businesses, and I also built other businesses in the back end even after selling that first one. And so you have all these income streams coming in. We always talked about diversifying and doing those kind of things. We did that. I've made a lot of money for several years, but what I started to see in the corporate world as I started getting closer to the executive roles, I started seeing things that I would question ethically and things that were going against my core values and my alignment. And there was even two different positions I'd resigned with previous companies because of core value issues. I saw things that are unethical. And you got to realize the higher you climb on that executive ladder, you're going to start to see some things that are not in writing that you don't really agree with.
Mm-hmm.
And the people that want to play the political game and go down that path, they're going to have to sacrifice their ethicals and integrities to go do those kind of things. It's like, that's just not who I am. And so I decided, I'm seeing some things I'm not liking here. I'm seeing ageism. I'm seeing racism. I'm seeing, people being selected by their sex and things like that. It's like, this is not the way it should be. It should always be the best candidate, no matter who that is. Right. And so a lot of things that are against the law in this country are still perpetuated in corporate America. They're just unspoken because it's illegal. So you'll never see it in writing, but those are key factors in decision-making at the leadership levels. And it shouldn't exist. I think if people are out there being leaders, they should be reporting these kind of conversations.
Mm-hmm.
They should be reporting their own company, even at the risk and the detriment of their own company, if it has true integrity.
I like what you're saying there. I think that, and of course, it depends on the company and the culture and the values, right, in terms of who's doing what. But, I've always felt like, if a company has an initiative, like let's promote more female leaders as an example, right, which is great, right? Females should
Yeah.
be represented equally, depending on the mix of their whole workplace and all of that.
Right.
Why do you need an initiative? Like, why do you need to declare that? Like, if your culture is such that it involves diversity and inclusion from the beginning, and it's hardwired that people, that you hire equally, you hire without bias, you develop without bias, then why do you need to lean on a plan that says I need to promote anybody because of their race or gender or whatever, religious belief or whatever? Because now you're doing a makeup call. You're doing a makeup call because your organization was wrong to begin with, and now you've got to right the ship, right? And it's an interesting subject that I'm sure we could stay on for a while, because I think there is a corporate responsibility to say, look, if you're out of balance, how do you get in balance, right? If you're a 99% white company, how do you get more diversity into your company? Like that's a real conversation to have.
Yes.
But again, it's based on maybe cultural mishaps up to that point, right? So I hear exactly what you're saying. And so when you left, was the intention? What was the intention when you left in 2015? Was it because I know you're doing, you have your podcast, you have your mastermind, you have live events. Like, was that the vision in 2015?
No, it wasn't. There was two situations that occurred at the end of 2015 that left me wanting to just kind of go do something else. First was there was industry layoffs going on in 2015, the oil industry. Barrels of oil took a low turn and people were getting laid off in waves. Probably for about a year, you saw these waves coming through the organization. And I think even Chevron laid off like 20% of their workforce. I was wrapping up a project in Africa and I understood that, hey, as soon as this project's done, we don't have anything else on the books. So we knew our entire project team was going to get laid off. And so that's when I started to see a lot of unethical things and people getting to stay because they were certain checking the box type things versus being good performers. And I had to be the one that laid off some of those people, and I didn't like that. And I said, this is wrong. I mean, we're laying off people that they were just too old. They were like, oh, and these guys are too old and we pay them too much. Like that should not even be a conversation. That's illegal. It's
Mm-hmm.
ageism, right?
Mm-hmm.
People like, oh, we should keep them because she's a woman and a minority. Like that should not be a part of a conversation. Like
Mm-hmm.
who is the best performer for this company? That's the question that should have been asked.
Mm-hmm.
And so I said, I don't like the way this industry is treating the people that are very loyal to it. I saw people that were getting laid off 20 years into a company within 6 months of their full pension getting laid off because they knew that they wouldn't have to pull out the full pension if they laid them off early. That's not right. That's just
Right.
not right. It's unethical. And so I said, I don't want to be a part of the industry at the highest levels that plays like this with their people who are very loyal to their company. So, that was one reason. I said, I'm just done with this. And I had a lot of people in the network. I mean, I'm 25 years in, and everybody's like, oh man, you're not going to come back. Like, there's very few people that do what you do. And I was like, I just disagree with what I'm seeing right now. It shouldn't be this way. If it maybe makes a turnaround, great, but I haven't seen it. I still have friends that are still working in the industry, and they tell me the same. They're still in the same situation nowadays, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so later in 2015, I had a car accident. I was racing cars at the track, and something in a rear suspension of a vehicle I was racing broke, and it put me into a wall at 130 miles per hour. And as I'm approaching the wall, I thought it was a near-death experience. I even said to myself, well, here I go. And so I really felt really peaceful in that moment. That's the profound thing. I didn't have fear. My life didn't flash before my eyes. I just felt peaceful because I was steering straight and that car was determined to go left into the wall. And I could see it coming. And I know that was only milliseconds, but it felt like an eternity. And after that accident, I had a series of questions. I'm sitting in the back of the ambulance assessing the wreckage right outside the door. It's like, what if I would have died right there? That's the first logical question. And then you kind of get to the next question. You think, well, had I died, what would I be remembered? How would I have been remembered if I would have died
Right.
right there? And you go, well, no one really thinks about that kind of question. And you go, okay, well, I've had friends that passed away recently in the same circles. How are they remembered? And I think, okay, cool. I got the answer now. I would have been nice, rich guy, cool cars, gone too soon. Because that's the kind of phrases you would see from people in your circles, like whatever you're involved with, like, oh, he was so nice, like, the good die young, like only the cliche phrases, but those are the things that people throw out.
Right.
And while that wasn't bad, what it was missing was impact. Like, I know that I've changed lives on a small level. I've helped several of my staff members and colleagues and friends build very successful companies and careers. But I also knew that I was hiding from putting myself out there that I could have a broader reach and impact more people. So to me, the legacy part was missing in that moment. And I said, okay, I need to do more. And I didn't know what that meant right away because everyone has a thing that they're here to destined to do. Everyone has a skill or a way to impact this world. We all have a different thing. And so for me, when you start to ask yourself, what do people come ask you for advice for repeatedly? Everyone that's watching this or listening to this, what is the thing that people keep coming to you for advice on? Pay attention to that because you may have established some kind of love or passion or authority in that industry or that niche or that topic. Maybe there's a business in there that you need to be focused on, or maybe that's the legacy that you want to go create. And for me, it was always business because they saw the things I had and the success I was making and running 2 different companies and all this. So I said, maybe that's it. The best way I'm going to impact this world is by teaching people confidence and business principles so that they can start, scale, and sell their companies and move their life. Because it's not only going to impact them as an individual, it's going to impact their children, their grandchildren that don't even exist yet, and future generations. So that's the legacy is I'm going to impact millions of people through legacy by helping people with business and confidence.
That's amazing. It's so that epiphany was kind of in that moment, in that near death experience, and
Yeah.
then was it kind of immediate there? Like, how did the plan form? How did it shape up from there?
It was the weeks to follow. So the epiphany occurred, realizing I could have been doing more because it could have been all lost right there.
Right.
Right. But then you go through the mission of trying to figure out how you're going to pursue your purpose. And I believe that our purpose changes about every decade of our life with these milestones. I just turned 50. I'm looking at different things and assessing what I used to believe and things are they still true or not, right? And so, when think about this as men in our 20s, we generally are really hungry for experience. We want to get promoted sooner than we probably are ready for. We want to
Mm-hmm.
gain knowledge, go through education. And then 30s, most men are just really focused on making money. Like I've learned things, I've got a little experience, I'm probably earning a little bit more. I'm just going to go abuse my body physically and mentally and go make as much money as possible. It's kind of how we are. We're starting families and stuff like that, right? 40 is really interesting for me. Is like I started to look more retrospect. I started to think about what could I have done better? What could I have improved on? Did I waste my time doing that? What are these sunk cost fallacies? Like I said, what are the things that are holding me back? What are the excuses and the lies that I still tell to myself that keeps me from getting or achieving what I want in my life? Right. And I did that for the last 10 years, and I've been really focused on that. And now at 50, I'm kind of excited about what I'm going to kind of realize in this next decade. But our purpose changes based on our situations, what our intentions are. The bigger that we can think, the more that we can realize that we can impact more people than we ever believed.
Yeah,
Because you may think to yourself, like, oh man, I'd never have 1,000 followers or 10,000 followers or stand on stages. I'm scared to do it. I was scared of doing that. I didn't like to do that. I had very high level insecurity about being on camera, didn't like my recorded voice, didn't like being on photos. I just avoided that stuff like my whole life. But after that accident, I realized that if that's the only excuse I have is my own insecurities and the fear of potential criticism that's keeping me from creating real impact in this world, then I just need to step up and become the right person and invest in
yeah,
my own skills and my own confidence and my own deliverable results that I will go do that thing and do whatever it takes, because I realize now that time is valuable and putting things off is never going to get you the result that you want or the impact that you want to create.
totally. And I love that whole section there. And I think, I think it's because your focus shifted to contribution. And then this idea of I don't like myself on camera, or I don't like myself on mic, sounds very vain and selfish and petty to ourselves,
Yeah.
right? Because it's like now I have a responsibility that I'm supposed to be giving back. I'm supposed to be helping other people out. I'm supposed to be, training future entrepreneurs or helping people, or whatever you're supposed to be doing. And but if it's just for yourself, or it's just for money, or it's just for something that's kind of shallow, then the whole idea of yeah, I don't want to be on a mic. It's like, yeah, because you're not that sold on it yourself, right? There's not a big enough
Yeah.
hook. There's not a big enough anchor to pull you. And so it's almost like, I think when I agree with you completely on the assessment of 20s and 30s and like hitting the pavement but I do feel, and I know you've interviewed or had over 250 episodes on your podcast where you're talking to entrepreneurs and you're talking to leaders, and the more people I talk to, the more that I realize that the road to fulfillment is through contribution,
Always.
and it always has been, yeah, and it always will be. And so whenever I talk to somebody who's done really well on paper, who has done really well statistically, but is frustrated, is they don't know where they're going, their life seems a little out of control, and I'm not talking about for a moment, but I'm talking about kind of all encompassing. It's because they haven't found that yet, and that doesn't mean that when you're in your 20s or 30s and you're like, I gotta get to 100 grand or 200 grand or whatever right now so I can pay for this 3,000 square foot house. That doesn't mean that that's wrong. It just means that's the stage of life you're in. But if you stay in
Right.
that stage of life, life ain't gonna be very much fun when you're 50 years old, 60 years old, just chasing promotions and titles and money.
I'm going to add to that because everything you said, I agree with 100% to it. But
Yeah,
to add another, let's say, icing to that, okay?
yeah,
I've always been one to focus on contribution. I've always been one to teach other people. I've always been the mentor. I've always been willing to, do that and help people that are less experienced or, new to the industry, things like that, and teach all my friends. I'm a teacher at heart. I've always wanted to be that. But the belief system wasn't there that I could achieve a result to teach more people. See, there's a lot of you out there watching and listening. You have that servant heart. You do help people. You may be not helping them on a large enough scale. It's because you don't believe in yourself that it's possible.
right,
So you may have had family and friends that have greatly benefited from being in your circle, and you think that's great. And you go, man, I wonder if I could share the same love and attention and passion and impact millions of people. And the answer is yes, but you don't believe it because you haven't done it to hundreds of people yet. You haven't done it to
right.
thousands of people yet. You haven't done it to millions of people yet. So that's where I was stuck. And I probably would have been stuck until I had that accident, because I just realized, like, oh, people around me love me and I'm helping them. But I just didn't realize the greater perspective and how much more potential we have to impact the world. And that's when it takes the courage, and that's when it takes to doing the hard work to becoming that right person. That's a lot of hard work, and it's not comfortable to do that. So
Yes.
if that's you out there listening or watching this, You got to go do the work. You can do a lot
Yeah.
more than you believe.
I agree so much. And have you heard that quote that hell on earth would be on your deathbed meeting the person that you could have become,
Yeah.
right before you're about to die? And that's what your story reminded me of a little bit. When you had that accident, it's sort of like you got that benefit in a way of the gift of that accident was the wake up call where your life was going fine. You're making better than fine. I mean, you're making good money. It sounded like you had a nice life, but was it everything you wanted it to be, right? And it's like that accident becomes a catalyst. My wife's a guide in a program called Sacred Gifts, and it's a really interesting program where it reminded me of what you were saying earlier, where if your friends are coming up to you and they're always asking about advice in the same area, maybe there's something there. In fact, there's definitely something there if they keep coming to you, right? Like unsolicited advice. When people are asking your unsolicited advice over and over again in a certain area, you've got something, like you're saying.
Yes.
And that Sacred Gifts program helps pull it out. So do you have the gift of hospitality? Do you have the gift of, wise counsel? Do you have the gift of whatever it might be? And it's kind of a cool way to wrap your head around it. But I agree with you completely that's a sign. I mean, it's more than a sign. It's almost like a punch in the face. Like
It
the world
is.
is telling you you've got something there. And whether you're a religious person, kind of believer in God, believer in spiritual, believer in the universe, believer in whatever you believe in, that forces are telling you, right? If you're looking for a sign, that's the sign, right?
Yeah.
It's everyone coming to you, not you pushing towards something. And I think that's cool.
Yeah, we often make the mistake of taking our skills and our talents for granted, and we assume that other people have the same skills and the same talents.
Right.
And so we kind of downplay the things that we've invested a lot of time, energy, and passion or knowledge to learn. And, we assume that everybody knows what we know, and it's just not the
Right.
truth. I mean, if you think about it, even a 5-year-old could teach a 4-year-old how to tie their shoes. So even a
Sure.
5-year-old could be the mentor in that moment, right? So
Yep.
it's interesting that people just think that they have to know the latest and the greatest information, but a lot of times just getting people to where you're at is the part that they're struggling with.
I think we're also, I mean, I guess I'll speak for myself, but for years I was so afraid of looking bad. It's like I just wanted to be good at everything, like right out of the gate. So if I was going to do anything, I'd practice in private a lot
Yes.
before I do anything in public to look bad. And it's
Yeah.
like in some tasks that's okay, right? Like practice a lot if you can, but in other ways it's like yeah, but you're just hiding, right? Like you're never if you're going to do anything of a creative endeavor, anything where you're going to put yourself out there, you're going to be subject to criticism. I would have done a podcast a lot sooner had I not
Yeah.
been worried about how shitty it was going to sound. And it did sound shitty and it is still, I'm still working on it not sounding shitty. But I mean, but those first few episodes, I wouldn't have tolerated it like 10 years ago. I was so
Yeah.
concerned with what everybody else thought that I would hold back on what I was going to give.
Totally, man. Like, here's a relatable story. Sometimes I'll teach this from the stage. Okay. I want anyone watching or listening to this, visualize yourself walking in a public place. There's people around, you're enjoying your day and you're not paying attention to anything. And you catch a gap in the sidewalk and you stumble and you like almost fall on your face and you catch yourself. And I always ask, what's the first thing that you do?
I
And
laugh.
people, you can either laugh, but most people, what they do by human
Look.
instinct is they look around to see who saw
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
They're so worried about looking like a fool or looking like a klutz or clumsy in front of other people who are perfect strangers. Like they'll never see these people again in their lives. But our initial instinct is like, oh, and then you're like, look and see who saw
Even while
that,
I'm laughing,
right?
I'm looking. I'll admit to that. Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. It
So
is.
we're hardwired to want to fit in and be likable and things like that. And men, especially alpha men, like they're very egotistical and they want to look like they're professional and everything. Like you said, I was the same way. And
Hmm.
that's really what keeps a lot of people from trying something new because they feel that they're entitled to a lateral move. So you got, your show's about Leaders Lab. There's a lot of leaders, a lot of CEOs and managers here listening, right? If they want to go do something completely new, a lot of these people have such egos because they've got status and prestige and experience in this one thing. They're highly regarded that starting something new is like a fear of theirs. Like, oh my God, I got to go be a newbie, a rookie. Like, oh God, I'm going to have to do the stupid stuff and look like an
Right.
amateur. Like they're so afraid of that status that they've created and the perceived, where they're at that they're not willing to go do something new. And Another example for that, I used to be a president of a Toastmasters club here. That's a public speaking,
Yeah.
group that's a nonprofit. Sometimes we get these guests that would come in and want to audit the meetings because they're considering joining, and they would show up and sit in the back of the room and they have their tie on and their dress clothes. And so we get to the end of the hour and we're like, hey, guest, what's your name? Tell us where you're from and how you found us and why you're here. And they'd be like, well, I'm a vice president of so and so, and my board of directors really recommended that I get some public speaking training. I don't think I need it, but I came because they asked me to do it. And so, like,
Yeah.
cool. Yeah. So we see this type a lot, right? The ego alpha business guy. And we invite him back the next week, and he kind of sits in the back, kind of sits in the back. And eventually he gets to the icebreaker speech where you just spend 2 to 3 minutes and you introduce yourself to the front of the group. That's it.
Right.
The story, where you came from, your introduction. They get up there and they're nervous and they're sweating and their voice is cracking and they say every other word, and so we give them that feedback. Hey, you said 25 times. Don't carry that piece of paper because we can see your hand shaking. And they get so humiliated, not by us trying to humiliate them. We're trying to raise their awareness. Half of those people don't come back. They don't come
Right.
back because they
And
had
they
in their
also
mind they
don't.
were such a status position and I'm the
Right.
boss and all these things, but they didn't have that skill set. They thought they did because they did presentations on a slideshow. But the ones that do stay, the ones that get humility and go, wow, I had no idea it was that bad. And they come back and they keep coming back. They become the best speakers.
Right. Well, the number one killer of a career is lack of your ability to be coached and grow, in my
Yes.
opinion. And so, yeah, if you get to that stage where, and I think I've been there where I've wanted to walk out of certain rooms, right? But you
Mhm.
stick through it. I mean, because on the other side of that pain is some growth, right? Is some good stuff. And I think I use quotes that I've heard in my life a lot, but that Tony Robbins one that says your success is directly attributable to the amount of uncertainty you can comfortably manage or comfortably live with. And he might have even said your fulfillment. I'm completely paraphrasing that, but he does talk about uncertainty and how much you can live with. And I think I mean, it's just so true, but I was hardwired. I don't know if you've ever like taken a human needs assessment and kind of figured out where you were on the 6 human needs, but I know the first time I took it when I was still in corporate America or maybe just exiting out, significance was my number one need. Like I had significance over contribution. I had significance over growth. I had significance over love,
Mhm.
So it was like, I knew those things were important, but what was more important is fucking respect me and give me a title and pay me lots of money. Right. And it's like significance for the sake of significance is a death spiral in more ways than one. I mean, not just from your career standpoint, but what do you think is going to happen to your relationships when, I love you, honey, but I'm more concerned with being a VP in my corporation, right? Or, I'll
Yeah.
get to the kids when I get to them, and
Yeah.
so it's interesting. I mean, the good news is we can all change it, right? It's just a matter of recognizing kind of where you're at and where you want to be.
It's what we say. If you show me your calendar, I'll show you your priorities.
Oh, I like that. Yeah, that's good. So what's
Mhm.
on your calendar these days?
Man, my calendar is about working half the day and enjoying talking to clients and traveling the world, and a very flexible business model that my wife and I have created. And I can operate all over the world with the things that I do. And I coach clients. Most of them are high 6-figure, 7-figure business owners. I have a few 8-figure business owners, but usually the sevens are the norm. And we help them with their personal lives, their health, wealth, mindset, relationships. And I just enjoy doing what I do, man. I love and look forward to every conversation I have because there's always breakthrough moments and perspective changes and challenges and just accountability. So, yeah, I love what I do. And I'm very fit. I go to the gym 6 days a week. I take the Sundays off, and we generally eat healthy. And we do a lot of different things. The wife and I go out almost every night.
What do you like to do at the gym?
Anything that's heavy. I really like the heavy lifts, like the deadlifts, the bench press, the squats. So I was really focused on the deadlifts really for the last 5 years.
I've been an Orange Theory guy lately. I just took a class like 2 hours ago, so here in New York.
There you
So
go. Yeah.
that's been
Discipline,
that's
man.
that's been pretty intense. But I wanted to ask you. So on your talk to me a little bit about your community that you've grown because I know you've got I believe like hundreds if not thousands of members in your community now, right?
Well, the automotive ones were hundreds of thousands of members. 365 Driven is relatively new. So we have about
Mhm.
4,000 members. It's business
Okay.
owners who, we don't believe in just being financially successful. I think that's just one aspect that we look into. So, 365 Driven is the brand. It's a mantra. It's, hey, I want to improve every day. It's not hustle and grind. I don't believe in that either. I think about balance. I think about how do we maintain our mental and our physical health, how we keep our relationships intact or grow those stronger, how do we serve the community. Like a lot of the aspects I think a lot of people are missing, because I used to be the guy that would take a picture of the cars and the 10 cars in the driveway and had a lot of insecurities and self-worth issues that I thought that money could kind of get past. But I had to do that internal investment and get through that. And when you have money for over a decade, it's kind of like, okay, now that flex stuff is kind of old. It's new money. I get it. I was there. I don't want to be a hypocrite, but you're going to see your way past it, hopefully with some guidance, right? And so we do these destination type getaways. We have these 3 to 4 day events that are live. We try to make them fun. We have an adventure. We've hiked in Zion National Park in Utah. We've whitewater
Nice.
rafted in Montana. We've rented out a racing school for driving, high performance racing school in Arizona for the day. And then we had one in Mexico in Playa del Carmen. So we're always looking for these destination vacation type getaways for entrepreneurs. And we bring in some speakers that are usually former guests of my show or people in my peer group. And we make sure that those speakers immerse themselves for the 3 to 4 days and involve themselves in all the activities too, because we want to build a community. And we do these small formats, usually 40 people is kind of the target. We try to keep these events small so everybody gets to interact. We share all the meals together and do some cool things and take some adventures.
I love that. I love that. And then you've got your podcast, of course, which has been going for what, 5 years or more?
It's, I guess, 4.5 years now. Yeah, we're a top
Okay.
1% rated show and thousands of downloads an episode, and health, wealth, mindset, relationships. It's called 365 Driven.
Nice. I don't know, if it's like this for you. I'd like to hear, I guess. But I'm a half a year in, right? And I was talking to my older sister yesterday, and she said, I've been listening to the podcast. It's getting better and better. And she said, it's almost, and she was trying to find the word, and I kind of interrupted her through the word, and I said therapeutic, like, and she meant for me, right?
Yeah.
And she was like, yeah, that's exactly what I meant, and because sitting down with people like yourself and hearing about their stories and hearing about their struggles and hearing about their triumphs and relating to your own, I mean, it is very therapeutic, right? And it's very
Yeah.
kind of inspiring, and I've had 30 of these conversations to your 250, but
Mhm.
I can only imagine that that's only helped make you stronger and stronger building that podcast brand, and yourself along with it through the last few years.
Yeah, I'll give you some perspective there. One of my earliest mentors in this space was Lewis Howes. I don't know if you're familiar with
Yeah,
his
yeah.
show, but yeah,
School of
he's a
Greatness.
huge
Yeah,
show. Yeah, School
yeah.
of Greatness. And when I asked him where that name came from, because I thought it was, we're getting an education, School of Greatness, like, oh, we're
Right,
learning from great people, right? The story is actually that he thought about it as his school. He was being educated by all these experts, these New York Times bestsellers, people who have achieved amazing things. So he considered it as his education, and everybody else was just listening in on him
right,
getting educated because he never
right,
wanted to position himself as the smartest guy in the room because that's not his character, right?
right,
And so you're like, dude, that's pretty clever. And when I launched my show, it's like, who do I want to have conversations with? Who do I want to learn
right,
from? And so when you create a show, you try to think about who do I want to have these conversations and learn from? Because the interesting about podcasts is that we're two people just meeting each other for the first time. This was literally our first conversation, and
right,
people get to listen in on that and explore that and go, man, that's interesting, or that I didn't know that about Ken. That's cool. Like this Tony guy's doing this. Oh, that's different. And so that's what makes these things very intriguing. So it is a learning experience and it is a great networking opportunity. And I think that if anybody really has the desire, even the smallest desire to go create a show, I would say go do that because the gift is far more important than the effort that you put into it.
absolutely. I agree with that completely and endorse that. And you've had some huge guests on your show. I saw you've had Ed Milet, and many others. But anyway, well, I want to thank you so much for joining me today. It's been really cool getting to meet you. I definitely want to check out your mastermind. It sounds right up my alley. I like the idea of uh, doing some classroom or conference room type work, but then also getting out and getting dirty and getting sweaty and working our
Yeah.
bodies a little bit. I like that as
Yeah.
well. So thanks so much. Really appreciate it. Appreciate you. We're going to put all ways to get a hold of you, of course, and your podcast in our show notes. But thanks again for joining me.
Hey, Ken, it's been a good conversation, and I can tell you got some good energy, and keep it up, man. That first 100 episodes seems like a long way, but then you get past it, and it kind of just goes into cruise control, and then you'll do hundreds later. You'll be like, wow, I can't believe how many episodes I've had.
I was hoping you were going to say that first 40 or 50 since I'm at 30, but
Man, I think
first
100 is a milestone. I think once you get into the 100 plus episodes,
yeah.
then you'll start to attract bigger and bigger guests because they realize that you're committed and you keep showing up.
Sure. Sure. Well, that's the name of the game, and we're going to keep showing up. Thanks for showing up for us today. I appreciate you, and take care. Have a good weekend.
Likewise.